Hi, and welcome to this episode of Encountering Jesus. My name is Cindy Johnston, and I'm your host. This is the Heaven's Door audiobook series. Here's the book.
Heaven's Door by Cindy Johnston. Copyright 2020. All rights reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced without permission. Chapter 19. Learning to Trust. These face-to-face encounters with Jesus have changed my life. Yet, when they first began, I often wondered why Jesus would reveal himself to me in this way. It has taken me a long time to figure out his purpose, but now I believe the answer is simple. Meeting Jesus in the secret place was the only way I could ever learn to love him and trust him with all my heart. That says a lot when you remember that most of my life, I lived in fear. Fear of God, fear of man, and fear of failure drove me in my struggle to live by the Bible and to prove I was good. Thankfully, God set me free by showing me his part in my salvation compared to my part. When he did, I understood that my Christian walk has never been about me or what I can do for him. Instead, it's always been about him and what he can do for me. It is his love that wins my heart and his blood that redeems me from my sin. This revelation set me free from striving. Now when I serve him, it's not me, but him working through me. In the following two encounters, I saw a glimpse of just how much Jesus had been changing me. Though these times with him were a bit scary, mostly they were fun and exciting. So as always, they challenged my archaic ideas about heaven being boring and dull. Here is what happened. One day Jesus took me to a part of my world that was much like a desert. The cliffs around us were very tall and almost boxy in shape. From what I could see, they had flat tops. The rock faces were also smooth-looking with minimal slope, so they were nearly perpendicular to the ground. The specific one that Jesus took me to was different. It had a large open cave near the top and a tall tree growing right up to the cave's entrance. As we approached, I noticed the cliff and the tree were about the same height. If I were guessing, would have said they were both about 300 feet high. The tree looked dead as it had no leaves, but weirder still was the tiny elevator sitting at the bottom of it. While digesting this thought, I saw the pulley system lodged in the top of the tree attached to the elevator. Instantly, I knew the plan was for us to go up to the cave in the cliff, and this rickety elevator tied to the dead tree with a rope was going to take us there. The closer we got, the more I could see that the phone booth-sized elevator wasn't much more than a few planks of wood held together by some nails. I found it disturbing that there was no door or support of any kind on the front of the lift. Yet to my relief, the other three sides of the little structure had horizontal wood planks that provided additional support and hand railings. As we stepped up to the elevator, nervously, I looked at Jesus. I knew he could feel my hesitancy, and in response, he gave me a reassuring smile. Then he helped me get in before stepping in beside me. I don't remember the sound of a motor, but as I felt us lift off the ground, I moved closer to Jesus. He put his arm around me, and I smiled at the sweetness of knowing he was there. I knew the pulley was working by the occasional squeak of the turning wheel. Despite such a simple system, I could see we were moving quickly as the land below us began to drop away. Soon the world around us came into a full panoramic view. The region was sparse of trees or vegetation but was beautiful in its grandness. There was only a brief moment of pleasure before a strong wind began howling through the canyon, causing our elevator to sway back and forth. My heart jumped, and I moved even closer to Jesus, and his arm tightened around me. Once we reached the top of the tree, the elevator stopped. I could see that it was supposed to line up with the rock ledge, but the wind kept pushing us away. 1 minute we would be within a few inches of the rock shelf and the next several feet away. These erratic changes had me convinced it was too dangerous to jump. Then to my surprise, Jesus let go of me, so I grabbed the wooden handrail. He took up the loose rope attached to the door frame before shouting, "Hang on," and jumping. I was stunned by his actions, and also amazed, because he did this so smoothly that the lift barely moved. Using the rope, Jesus pulled the elevator to the rock ledge and then tied it off to a hook embedded in the rock. Securing the elevator did not make it stop moving as the wind was relentless. I kept my eye on the step, but the constant shifting made me too afraid to jump. I looked up to Jesus, who was waiting with his loving eyes twinkling. Then he leaned over towards me and opened his arms. Right then, I knew something incredible had changed in me. What those arms offered in love and strength far outweighed my fears. So, I jumped into them without a thought of the cliff or the fall. As he pulled me away from the edge and gave me a big hug, I knew he was proud of me. Then he took my hand and pulled me towards the inside of the cave. The wonder of these new heart changes had me so preoccupied with Jesus' goodness that I barely noticed when we came into the middle of an immense dark cavern. Once my eyes adjusted and my thoughts returned to the present, I could see we were in a place that was massive but empty. Puzzled, I allowed Jesus to guide me to the wall in the back where there was an unseen door. Behind it was another cavern. To my surprise, this hidden cave had the start of a mining rail system. There were cars on the rails and a few small men working the mining cars. For a moment, I wondered if they were angels, but I didn't see anything about them that made me know for sure. Jesus guided me to get into the next car available, so I glided across the long seat to make room for him. Then he slid in beside me and pulled me close. I got the impression that he was enjoying my nearness. So often, I have thought about what I needed from Jesus, so it was different for me to think about how I might delight him. Soon I noticed there was a large bar down in front of us to keep us secure in the seat. I don't know how it got there, but I grabbed it when the motor came to life, and we started to move. Suddenly, the rails dropped away, and we plunged straight down. This unexpected change took my breath, so I grabbed Jesus in my distress. The fear only lasted a few seconds because I realized we were on an incredible roller coaster ride. Which, by the way, I usually didn't like. What joy it was to find I was holding on to Jesus with all my might. I found such pleasure with him so near as we went up, down, and looped around to the bottom of the mine. When the car stopped, and we got out, I only gave a passing glance to the darkness that lay beyond our rail car. So, I had no idea if we were at the bottom or if this was a stop along the way. As we stood there, I found myself trying to collect my thoughts. First, there was the erratic elevator journey, then the crazy coaster ride, and now the mysterious mine exploration. I was barely getting a break between one grand escapade to the next. I took a deep breath as I looked around. We were at the mouth of a spectacular cavern. It wasn't as large as the first cave we came into at the top of the cliff, but it was by far more beautiful. Gorgeous lanterns shone throughout the area. The cavern's polished appearance gave me the impression that it wasn't just a mine, rather, it was a lovely sculpture. The holes in the rock walls that held the lanterns were artistically positioned throughout the cave and beautifully carved. There was a smooth set of stairs that ran as a half circle over the top of a smaller cavern entrance located in the wall to our left. The lighting and the perfectly crafted stairs gave the room an attractive and regal appearance. As I took in the overall beauty of the place, I noticed Jesus observing me closely. He kept smiling at me, so I wondered if he was still joyful from the ride. He soon took my arm and gently led me over to a table sitting in the middle of the floor. There were several chunky-looking rocks on top of it, ranging from baseball-sized to extra-large softball-sized. From a distance they just looked like chunky rocks, but as we approached the table, I could see beautiful veins of brilliant gems sparkling out of them. I began looking over some of the rocks, then felt Jesus watching me again. I looked up, and he smiled. Then I smiled back and went on with my examination. I thought Jesus would join in the fun, but he didn't. He just kept watching me. I tried to act nonchalant as I continued studying the rocks, but I was starting to feel self-conscious. After a few minutes of silence and wondering what he was thinking, I finally stole a glance over at Jesus. I felt a shock go through me as my heart started pounding. The depth of love in his beautiful eyes left me no doubt he was madly in love with me. You know that in this mine, there are some of the rarest stones I have ever discovered, he said as his eyes never left mine. I felt breathless and lost in the depths of such intense love. Dazed and puppet-like, I shook my head back and forth like I was in a trance. I had no idea what he was saying. All I could think about was how I wanted and needed him so desperately. Suddenly, his heart drew me close. When I looked up again, this time, his eyes were fiery. I lost all pretense of knowing anything as my thoughts became very simple. At that moment, there was only one thing that I knew existed. Jesus. He was all I could think of, and with every fiber of my being, he was all I wanted. Jesus gave me his adorable humble smile and went on like he hadn't noticed I'd just turned into a puddle of doting adoration. In fact, he said as he took my hand, some of them I've never seen before. He gave a dramatic pause and then said, ever. It was like my mind was in freeze frame, and my heart was floating on a cloud of sweet worship. I was lost in a love so divine that no words could describe. He waited as if I was supposed to understand, but nothing in me wanted to know anything other than him. Then he smiled at me and changed the subject. Why don't you pick out a couple of rocks, and I will have them sent back to the palace. We will have some of them made into special jewels you can wear. I nodded. I was excited to pick out some special gems, but not for selfish reasons. Instead, I was eager to find just the right colors for Jesus and God the Father to enjoy. All I wanted was for them to see me wearing those gorgeous jewels so it would bring them immense pleasure. I looked them over carefully. I knew Jesus liked blue, and I thought the Father liked green, so I picked out a light-colored blue-green one and a pretty bright green one. Then handed them over to one of the workers, and they took them away. Chapter 20. Bright Morning Star. While Jesus and I were still in the beautiful mining cave, the workers returned to clear the remaining rocks off the table. Jesus gestured toward the smaller cave. Would you like to see where they're mining the gems? I smiled and nodded. Then he led me over to the semicircular staircase that framed the mine entrance. Once there, we stepped inside. The cave was much smaller and more dimly lit than the lovely one we just left. The dome-shaped room was empty except for the mining shaft that led off to the right. Its entrance was framed with thick wood beams. As we made our way down the tunnel, I found the ceiling was barely above our heads, and the walls were rough. About halfway through the passageway, the roof began to slope downward. By the time we reached the end, we had to bend over to keep from bumping our heads. Jesus went to the very back of the tunnel and ran his hand over the wall where a vein of bright gems was catching the soft lights. Then he looked up at me with that same overwhelming look of love and said, "These are some of the rarest stones I have ever seen. Their fire and brilliance are exceptional." However, as before, I still had no idea what Jesus was trying to say. "Cindy, this is your world," Jesus said with meaning. Now the light of understanding began to dawn, but you have to see this from my perspective to know why it wasn't clear. Here was Jesus in front of me. He, without a doubt, is the grandest treasure of all treasures. Seeing him standing next to those rough gems was like comparing the rarest and most beautiful diamond ever found to a lump of coal. How could I possibly appreciate that lump of coal when the bright morning star was standing there looking at me with those eyes of love? He sighed. A look of resignation came over his face as he pulled me into his arms and gave me a tender hug. His sweetness brought my heart close to his, and our thoughts began to merge. With our hearts united in love, I felt him helping me accept what he was saying. "Daughter, this is you," he said softly. "You're the one with some of the rarest stones I have ever seen." Through his eyes, I saw his admiration of me. My mind went back to that hideous spider crab. That story, along with so many others, including this one, helps me see the work of God's redemption just when I need it. You see, my slow progress, along with my dysfunctional behavior, often leaves me feeling discouraged. Yet, here in this mine, I was shown all the hidden work going on behind the scenes. How exciting to find that all the intense pressure throughout my life had created the perfect environment for producing some of the rarest stones Jesus had ever seen. At that moment, I was so thrilled about my life of pain. As ridiculous as it sounds, I was thankful for all the abuse, rejection, poverty, loss, and misery I endured because the redeemed products were bringing great pleasure to my precious Savior. Perhaps you are thinking about how you would love to have something this special with Jesus. I want to assure you that you already do. In fact, each one of us carries the DNA of the Creator. When we allow Jesus access to our hearts, He will find our unique secret treasures. We are such astonishing beings. God's handiwork in each of us reveals that we are meticulously and individually crafted. That's why Jesus can't wait to uncover who we are. He can't wait to see all the precious things hidden inside of us. He can't wait to share the beauty with us. All we have to do is completely surrender our heart. My fun adventure with Jesus wasn't over, so let me take you back to the cave as we leave it for our next journey. Flying with Jesus. "It's time to go," Jesus said, then led me out of the mine and back to the brightly lit cave. The mining car was still waiting for us, so Jesus helped me inside. This time the ride was more direct as we quickly spiraled up the steep outer walls. The short ride took us back into the first cave at the top of the cliff. When we got out, Jesus didn't head over to where the tree elevator was, but instead, He led me to the other side of the cave's mouth. As we stood on the edge, I could see a wooden ladder on the face of the cliff beside us. I looked up and saw the rails went all the way to the top of the cliff. Without hesitation, Jesus stepped out onto the first rung and began ascending. I followed him up, keeping my eyes on him and refusing to look down lest I get too frightened. When Jesus reached the end of the ladder, he climbed onto the cliff top, then turned to offer me his hand. "This way, sweet one," Jesus encouraged as he pulled me up. It was as if he was treating me like one of the delicate gems we saw deep in the mine. Jesus' tenderness and admiration were undeniable, and yet I was still sweetly oblivious. His excessive love quieted all my insecurities, and I found a humility I did not know I possessed. He took my hand as we reached the top, and we walked across the cliff to the far side. I took a deep breath as I looked out over the landscape. We were very high up, so I could see for miles. To my delight, I saw the little beach house, then a few miles beyond that was the castle off in the distance. "You want to jump off with me?" Jesus grinned mischievously. Clearly, he was enjoying my shock as he knew his question was completely unexpected. At first, I was hesitant. Stunned at the idea of jumping, I asked Jesus if he would catch me. Then to my surprise, he said that I could fly. Suddenly, I remembered seeing my wings one day when the Spirit gave me a glimpse of myself. It was about the same time I started dressing up in all the beautiful gowns. When I saw my wings, I was astounded but delighted. They looked to be like a butterfly's wings, only made of light. When I asked Jesus about them, he said they were his glory and that they would complement whatever clothes I wore. He told me he would always enhance my loveliness as his glory surrounded me with his radiance. Since I knew that my beauty was for him to enjoy, I didn't think to hold on to it as my own. As I recall, those wings were enormous. wholly surrounding me. They went all the way from my feet to about 2 feet over my head. But that was the only time I had ever seen them, so I assumed they were more for show than for flying. I knew that whatever happened, Jesus would take care of me. Once I found out that those wings were real, I was ready to go. Hand in hand, we jumped at the same time. Instead of falling straight down, we began to glide as our wings allowed us to fly slowly back towards the ground. Well, truthfully, I never saw Jesus' wings, but that was how it happened all the same. It was exhilarating and unusual. We landed on the shore, just a stone's throw from the beach house.
Thank you for listening to my podcast. I have many more series that you can find on my website, heavensdoor41.com. Okay, have a great day. Bye now.